Have you ever imagined that the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago could accidentally slip his family's priceless ring onto the wrong woman's finger, only to watch her calmly hand it back in front of 300 of the most influential people in America? What happened in the next few minutes didn't just shatter a carefully planned alliance. It exposed a conspiracy buried for years, changed the life of a forgotten florist named Grace Miller, and forced Adrian Russo to discover that the strongest heart in the room belonged to the one person everyone had underestimated. Stay with me, because this unforgettable story is only beginning. The crystal chandeliers of the Holston Crown Hotel scattered golden light across polished marble, where nearly 300 senators, billionaires, and crime syndicate leaders waited for history to unfold. Cameras hovered like silent birds. Every eye followed Adrian Russo, the most feared man in Chicago, as he stepped onto the stage with a velvet ring box in his hand. Tonight was supposed to unite two powerful families. Nothing had been left to chance, except one woman kneeling beside the stage. Grace Miller barely noticed the applause. Her attention stayed on the white orchid arrangement that had slipped from its stand moments earlier. She adjusted each stem with practiced hands, brushing invisible dust from the petals before rising with a relieved smile. Flowers deserved to be perfect, even if no one remembered who arranged them. A stage coordinator waved frantically. "Closer! Move closer!" Thinking she was blocking the photographers, Grace took one careful step. At the same instant, Adrian turned. Without looking twice, he reached for the nearest hand. The ballroom erupted in applause. The diamond caught the light as it settled onto Grace's finger. Her breath caught. Across the room stood Isabella Marlowe in an emerald gown, frozen in disbelief. Only then did Adrian truly lift his eyes. Silence spread faster than the applause had. Grace looked from the ring to Adrian, then toward the woman whose expression answered every question. A faint sadness crossed her face instead of excitement. Gently, she slipped the ring from her finger and folded Adrian's hand around it. "A beautiful ring," she said softly. "But an expensive promise can't turn a mistake into destiny." The last camera shutter fell silent. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Isabella's face burned with humiliation. "Remove her," she snapped. "Get that woman out of this room." Grace lowered her gaze, picked up her florist's apron, and prepared to leave. Before a single guard moved, Adrian spoke. "No one leaves." His calm voice carried farther than a shout. The guards stopped. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Adrian never looked at Isabella. He stared only at the woman who had calmly returned the one thing no one had ever refused him. Slowly, he opened his hand and looked at the family ring resting in his palm. Then he turned toward his closest advisor. "Nathan," he asked quietly, "who changed the positions on this stage?" Nathan Cole's composed expression barely shifted. "Probably a nervous stagehand, Mr. Russo. I'll investigate immediately." His answer sounded polished, yet something in his eyes lingered a fraction too long. Adrian closed his hand around the ring without replying. Across the ballroom, Grace quietly slipped through a service corridor, hoping to leave before anyone remembered her name. 3 days earlier, her world had been far smaller than crystal chandeliers and whispered alliances. Morning sunlight filtered through the front window of Miller Blooms, a modest flower shop tucked between an old bookstore and a family bakery in Bronzeville. Grace hummed softly while trimming roses, pretending not to notice the overdue rent notice resting beneath the cash register. She had learned long ago, that worry never helped flowers bloom. Years before, her husband had disappeared with their savings, leaving only unpaid bills and a promise that never returned. Later, a luxury hotel dismissed her because management believed a plus-size black florist did not fit the elegant image they wanted clients to remember. The memory still stung, but she refused to let bitterness become part of her character. Every Wednesday afternoon, she carried leftover bouquets to the children's oncology wing at St. Euphienchichel, Catherine's Hospital. She remembered every child's favorite color, every parent's tired smile, and every nurse who secretly needed encouragement as much as the patients. That afternoon, she noticed an elderly woman sitting alone, breathing too quickly as panic clouded her eyes. Grace knelt beside her without asking who she was. She placed a sprig of lavender into the woman's trembling hand. "Slow breaths," Grace whispered. "Flowers don't rush." "Neither should you." The woman's heartbeat gradually settled. Before leaving, Grace smiled as though comforting strangers was the most ordinary thing in the world. Only after she disappeared did the hospital director hurry toward the woman. "Mrs. Russo, are you all right?" Evelyn Russo glanced toward the hallway where Grace had vanished. "Find that florist," she said gently. "I'd like her to decorate my son's gala." The invitation arrived the following afternoon on heavy cream stationery embossed with the Russo family crest. Grace read it 3 times before laughing under her breath. "Someone must have mixed up the addresses," she murmured. Yet the signature at the bottom belonged to Evelyn herself. The payment attached to the contract would cover 3 months of overdue rent for Miller Blooms, so Grace accepted, promising herself it would simply be another job. Rain shimmered over Chicago Riverwalk on the night of the gala as a procession of glossy black SUVs rolled beneath the hotel's grand entrance, their headlights reflected across wet pavement like ribbons of silver. Grace and her 2 assistants carefully wheeled towering arrangements of white orchids, roses and lilies through the service entrance, while waiters hurried past carrying crystal trays. Inside, elegance hid impatience. One event coordinator glanced at Grace's curvy figure before muttering, "Stay out of the photographs. Guests expect luxury, not the staff." Grace smiled politely and kept working. Near the ballroom doors, a young waitress slipped on a loose section of carpet, nearly sending champagne across a senator's tuxedo. Grace caught the tray just in time, steadied the frightened woman, and quietly pulled the rug flat before anyone else stumbled. "You saved my job," the waitress whispered. "No," Grace replied with a warm smile. "You kept your balance. I only held the tray." From the second-floor balcony, Adrian Russo noticed everything. He had expected another vendor eager to impress wealthy clients. Instead, he saw a woman who accepted insults without surrendering her dignity and solved problems before anyone thought to assign blame. His gaze lingered longer than he intended. Across the room, Isabella Marlowe noticed where he was looking. Her expression tightened. As photographers rehearsed their positions for the engagement announcement, Nathan Cole stepped beside a nervous stage manager and spoke only 4 quiet words. "Move Miss Marlowe left." The manager obeyed without question. Moments later, Grace knelt beside the stage to straighten one final fallen orchid, never realizing that a single change in position was about to alter every life inside the ballroom. By sunrise, every television in Chicago carried the same photograph. Grace stood beneath glittering chandeliers, calmly placing Adrian Russo's family ring back into his hand while the city's elite watched in stunned silence. The headlines called her fearless, manipulative, mysterious, even ambitious. None of them asked who she really was. She ignored every interview request. She declined every offer to sell her story. She even switched off her phone after strangers began leaving messages promising fame if she would simply keep talking. Instead, Grace unlocked Miller blooms before dawn, swept fallen petals from the wooden floor, and arranged flowers for customers who suddenly stopped coming. Within 3 days, 2 weddings cancelled. A hotel terminated its contract. A corporate client politely explained they wished to avoid unnecessary publicity. Grace folded every cancellation into the same drawer without complaint. That afternoon, she carried the remaining white lilies to the funeral of an elderly neighbor whose family could barely afford a service. She never mentioned the lost income. She only adjusted each bouquet until the chapel looked peaceful. Across the city, Adrian sat inside the glass conference room of Russo Holdings while Nathan summarized the damage. "The media believes she planned everything," Nathan said evenly. "Public attention will fade if we simply ignore her." Adrian looked out over the grey Chicago skyline. "Did she accept money?" "No." "Interviews?" "No." "She contacted the press?" Nathan hesitated. "No." For several quiet seconds, Adrian said nothing. Then he closed the report. "She lost contracts because of me." Nathan quickly replied, "She's insignificant compared to what this engagement represents." Adrian slowly stood. People who seek attention don't disappear. Without another word, he left the meeting. An hour later, a single black sedan stopped beside the modest flower shop in Bronzeville instead of arriving with a convoy. Grace looked up as the front doorbell chimed. Seeing Adrian Russo standing among buckets of fresh roses, she neither smiled nor panicked. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and met his eyes. "If you're here to buy my silence," she said calmly, "the door is right behind you." Adrian glanced at the little brass bell above the entrance before answering. "If I wanted silence, I wouldn't have come myself." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The shop smelled of eucalyptus and fresh roses, while rain tapped softly against the front window. Customers passed outside without recognizing the man standing among buckets of wildflowers. Finally, Adrian cleared his throat. "I need flowers for my mother." Grace folded her arms. "What kind does she love?" He hesitated. "I don't know." She studied him with quiet surprise. "You know the security schedule for every building you own, but not your mother's favorite flowers." His silence became the answer. Grace walked toward a work table covered with stems and ribbon. "People usually choose perfect flowers," she said while selecting pale lavender and white garden roses. "Perfect flowers impress strangers. Favorite flowers comfort family." Adrian watched her hands move with effortless confidence. "Why lavender?" "She held it the day we met at the hospital." She relaxed the moment she smelled it. Grace looked up. "I remembered." "You didn't." The words were gentle, yet they landed harder than criticism. She wrapped the bouquet in simple brown paper instead of expensive satin. "No diamonds," she smiled. "Just honesty." That evening, Adrian carried the bouquet into the quiet Russo estate. Evelyn looked up from the sunroom where she had spent months refusing to leave after Michael's death. She touched the lavender first. Then she smiled. "I haven't smelled this since your father planted it outside our old house." For the first time in nearly 2 years, she walked into the garden. The servants exchanged stunned glances. The next morning, Adrian returned to Miller Bloom's with coffee. A week later, he came back carrying flower pots because Grace refused to let him pay someone else to move them. Soon, his bodyguards stopped entering the shop after Grace politely reminded them that frightened customers rarely bought flowers. One quiet evening, while organizing invoices for the Russo Charity Foundation, Grace frowned. Several deliveries listed unusual flower names she had never sold. The colors repeated too perfectly. She whispered to herself, "These aren't flower orders." Someone had hidden something inside the records. Grace spread the invoices across her work table after closing time. The flower names were real, yet the color combinations made no sense. Crimson lilies in the middle of winter. Blue orchids ordered in quantities no florist would ever request. More strangely, the same unusual colors appeared on invoices from different charities connected to the Russo Foundation. The bell above the shop door rang. Adrian stepped inside carrying 2 coffees. "You're working late." Grace slid the papers beneath another folder before smiling. Flowers don't arrange themselves. He noticed the concern in her eyes but didn't press her. Instead, he handed her a warm cup. "My mother asked whether you'll have dinner with us on Sunday." Grace blinked. "She asked me?" "She insisted." A quiet smile crossed her face. "I'll think about it." Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Inside, Nathan Cole watched through tinted glass. His expression darkened. For weeks he had expected the scandal to drive Grace away. Instead, Adrian visited her almost every day. Nathan closed a confidential file marked Russo Foundation. Grace Miller was becoming a problem. The following morning, the manager of Miller Bloom's received an unexpected call from the bank. Their operating loan had been suspended pending a financial review. An hour later, 2 long-time corporate clients cancelled standing contracts without explanation. By afternoon, anonymous accounts flooded social media with photographs from the gala beside fabricated headlines claiming Grace had deliberately seduced powerful men to rescue her failing business. Customers began hesitating before entering the shop. Grace quietly turned the sign from open to closed and leaned against the counter, exhausted but refusing to cry. That evening, an unmarked envelope appeared beneath her door. Inside were 2 photographs. One showed Adrian standing beside her outside St. Catherine's Hospital. The second captured him carrying flowers from her shop. No message, only a single sentence typed across a blank card. "Leave Adrian Russo before someone else dies." Grace read it twice. Outside, headlights swept across the darkened storefront before disappearing into the night. Across town, Nathan calmly placed another file into his briefcase. "The second gala," he told Isabella Marlowe the next morning, "is where everyone will remember exactly where Grace Miller belongs." Isabella slowly nodded, never realizing she had just agreed to become another piece on Nathan's board. The gala at the Lakeshore Museum overlooked the dark waters of Lake Michigan, where city lights shimmered against the glass walls like scattered stars. Grace accepted the invitation only because the evening promised a generous donation to children's art programs if the floral displays were completed on time. She reminded herself she was there to work, not to revisit old headlines. The whispers began before she finished arranging the final centerpiece. "That's the woman, the one with the ring." Isabella crossed the marble floor with effortless elegance, stopping only a few feet away. "I suppose publicity has been good for business," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Grace met her eyes without anger. "My flowers are doing the work," she answered quietly. "The headlines never watered them." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nathan chose that exact moment to step toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced smoothly, "before tonight's donations are presented, we must address concerns regarding missing charitable funds." A giant screen lit up behind him. Invoices bearing Grace's business name appeared one after another. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Someone whispered that she had stolen from sick children. Another guest quietly stepped away from her. Grace stared at the documents, her heart sinking. The signatures looked authentic, but the flower varieties listed on the invoices were impossible. Blue ghost orchids, black tulips in midsummer, silver peonies that did not even exist. Nathan folded his hands. "Miss Miller," he asked, "would you care to explain?" Before Grace could answer, Adrian walked through the silent crowd. He never touched her. He never stood in front of her. Instead, he faced the audience. "No one in this room," he said evenly, "will judge her before the truth is examined." He turned toward the technicians. "Display the original financial database." Nathan's confident smile disappeared. As the files loaded across the screen, Grace's eyes widened. The fake invoices repeated the same rare flower names she had noticed inside the Russo Foundation records. She leaned closer to Adrian and whispered only one sentence. "These aren't fake orders. They're directions." Adrian looked at her sharply. "Directions to where?" Grace never took her eyes off the screen. "A warehouse at Calumet Harbor." Adrian didn't ask another question until they were alone. Outside the museum, cold wind rolled in from Lake Michigan as black umbrellas surrounded the entrance. His security team immediately stepped forward, opening the rear door of a waiting sedan. "You're coming to the estate," Adrian said quietly, "until we know what this means." Grace looked at the waiting guards, then back at him. "No." The answer surprised everyone. "It isn't safe," Adrian replied. "For who?" she asked. "Me, or the people standing around me." He fell silent. Grace folded the copied invoices into her handbag. "If I hide behind your walls, people will think every lie about me is true. I'll become a woman rescued by power instead of someone searching for the truth. You're being threatened, and locking me away won't stop whoever sent those threats." For the first time in years, Adrian realized that protection and control were not the same thing. He dismissed his bodyguards with a slight gesture. "Give us a minute." The drivers stepped back. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement while traffic drifted through the Chicago night. Finally, Adrian spoke. "What do you want?" "I want access to every invoice connected to the Russo Foundation. No hidden files, no edited reports. If you truly trust me, let me investigate." He searched her face. Most people asked him for money. Others wanted influence. Grace wanted the truth. "You'll have full access," he said. "And one more thing." "Yes." "If I discover someone close to you is responsible, you don't get to decide the outcome before the evidence does." His jaw tightened. "You're asking a great deal." "No," Grace answered softly. "I'm asking whether you want justice or obedience." The question followed them all the way to the Russo estate. Later that evening, Adrian led her through a glass conservatory glowing beneath soft garden lights. Lavender and rosemary filled the warm air. "My brother Michael loved this place," he admitted. Grace remained quiet. I ignored his concerns about someone inside the organization. Weeks later, he was dead. Adrian lowered his eyes. Since then, I've trusted control more than people. Grace rested one hand against the wooden table. Control didn't save him, she whispered. Maybe truth still can. Before leaving, she opened another financial ledger. One payment caught her attention. Michael Russo, issued 3 months after his funeral. Grace slowly looked up. Adrian, someone has been using your brother's name. The conservatory fell silent except for the soft hum of the fountain beyond the glass. Adrian stared at the ledger, his face unreadable. Michael Russo's memorial had filled the cathedral. Adrian himself had lowered the casket into the ground. There should have been no payments, no signatures, no financial activity carrying his brother's name months later. Marcus, Adrian's longtime security advisor, arrived within minutes with archived shipping records and surveillance logs from Calumet Harbor. Grace spread every document across the table beside the flower invoices. She ignored the account numbers at first. Instead, she searched for colors, seasonal blooms, and delivery dates. Suddenly, she smiled without joy. They aren't ordering flowers, she whispered. They're building a code. Every rare flower represented a dock. Every color marked a cargo route. Every delivery date matched a financial transfer. The name Michael Russo had become the final key that tied the entire system together. Nathan had hidden millions behind ordinary charity shipments. Before Adrian could answer, shouting echoed from the main hallway. A housekeeper rushed into the conservatory. Mrs. Russo collapsed. They ran. Evelyn sat pale in the breakfast room, her teacup lying shattered across the marble floor. A physician checked her pulse while servants stood frozen in panic. Grace knelt beside the overturned tray. She didn't reach for Evelyn. She reached for the teapot. A faint herbal scent lingered beneath the chamomile. This isn't the tea she drinks, Grace said quietly. The doctor paused. What did you smell? Sweet woodruff. And something bitter underneath. The physician immediately ordered additional tests instead of assuming exhaustion. Minutes later, he returned, visibly shaken. There was a sedative mixed into the tea. Another hour, and her breathing could have slowed dangerously. Adrian looked toward the untouched second cup on the tray. Someone inside the estate had expected him to drink with his mother. Marcus quietly detained the kitchen staff for questioning, but one young nurse attempted to leave through the rear entrance. Inside her pocket was a prepaid phone. The final message on its screen contained only one sentence. If the old woman survives, bring the florist to Calumet Harbor. Adrian closed the phone without speaking. Grace met his eyes. They're afraid of what we've already discovered. For the first time, Adrian realized Grace was no longer being targeted because of a mistaken engagement. She had become the greatest threat to the conspiracy hidden inside his own empire. The message on the prepaid phone changed everything. Marcus wanted to surround Grace with armed protection. Adrian was ready to shut down every warehouse connected to the Russo Foundation before sunrise. Grace shook her head. If we move first, Nathan disappears. The room fell silent. He believes I'm just the florist who accidentally found the wrong papers, she continued. Let him keep believing that. Adrian studied her for several long seconds. You're asking me to let you walk into a trap? No, she answered. I'm asking you to trust me, the way I've trusted you. It was the hardest decision he had made since burying his brother. By nightfall, rain swept across Calumet Harbor, turning rows of steel containers into dark mirrors beneath the dock lights. Freight cranes stood motionless against the cloudy sky, while distant ship horns echoed across the water. Grace stepped onto the empty loading dock, carrying a weathered ledger that appeared to contain every coded invoice. In reality, Marcus had replaced every page with harmless copies. Hidden several hundred yards away, federal agents waited inside unmarked vans while Adrian watched through binoculars from the upper level of an abandoned warehouse. His hands remained steady. His heartbeat did not. A black SUV rolled slowly onto the pier. Nathan Cole stepped out first. Behind him came Isabella Marlowe. She looked frightened rather than triumphant. "You told me she was blackmailing Adrian," Isabella said quietly. Nathan never looked at her. "I told you what was necessary." Grace remained calm. "You used her, just like you used everyone else." Nathan smiled faintly. People are always easier to move when they believe they're making their own choices. He reached toward the ledger. Before his fingers touched it, Grace noticed something unusual near the shipping office. Colored electrical tape. Red, blue, white. The exact sequence hidden inside the flower invoices. Her eyes widened. "The warehouse isn't the target," she whispered. "The explosives are wired to the evidence room." Nathan's smile vanished. Grace ran. Ignoring the shouting behind her, she followed the colored cables beneath the rain-soaked platform until they disappeared into an electrical control box. The wiring matched the coded flower pattern perfectly. With trembling fingers, she disconnected the final live circuit just as the countdown reached its last seconds. The timer went dark. At that same instant, floodlights exploded across the harbor. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" As officers surrounded the pier, Nathan slowly raised his hands. Then he looked at Adrian and laughed. "You still don't know who really ordered Michael's death." Nathan offered no further explanation as federal agents placed him in handcuffs. His smile lingered long after the patrol cars disappeared into the rain, leaving Adrian with a question heavier than any victory. By dawn, Marcus and a federal financial task force had finished searching the warehouse. Hidden beneath a false concrete floor, they discovered encrypted drives, shipping manifests, offshore banking records, and a map linking dozens of fake charities across the country. One file led directly beneath Russo Holdings. Hours later, Adrian, Grace, and Marcus descended into a forgotten vault below the corporation's headquarters. Dust floated through the flashlight beams as Marcus unlocked a steel safe concealed behind an old electrical panel. Inside rested a recorder, several signed contracts, and letters bearing a familiar signature. Anthony Marlowe, Isabella's father. Grace quietly pressed the play button. Nathan's voice filled the room. "The chairman will never suspect Mr. Marlowe. Michael already knows too much about the hospital transfers. If he talks, everything collapses," another voice answered. "Anthony Marlowe. Then make certain he never reaches the board meeting." The recording ended. Silence settled over the room. Adrian closed his eyes. For years he had blamed rival families. The betrayal had been much closer. When Isabella arrived later that afternoon, Marcus handed her the evidence without speaking. She listened to the recording with trembling hands. "My father," she whispered. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not deny the truth. Instead, she unlocked her phone and opened a private archive containing years of correspondence she had secretly kept after growing suspicious of her father's business dealings. "If this helps finish it," she said quietly, take everything. That evening, every senior member of the Russo organization gathered inside the council chamber. Some demanded revenge. Others demanded war. Adrian remained standing until the room became silent. Grace met his eyes from the back of the chamber. She gave only the slightest shake of her head. He understood. "Justice," Adrian said calmly, placing every document onto the table, "is not the same as revenge." He ordered every record delivered to federal prosecutors, every fraudulent account frozen, and every charity restored with recovered funds. Then he reached into his jacket and placed the Russo family ring in the center of the table. "This ring," he said, "will never again be used to purchase an alliance." No one spoke. No one objected. For the first time since Michael's death, Adrian chose truth over fear, and every life inside that room changed with him. The trials lasted for months. Nathan Cole, Anthony Marlowe, and every accomplice tied to the laundering network faced justice through the courts. Frozen accounts were returned to the charities they had exploited, while children's hospitals and community programs finally received the money that had been stolen from them. Newspapers that had once questioned Grace's character now printed a different headline: "The florist who uncovered an empire of lies." Grace accepted none of the interviews. She was too busy planting something far more meaningful. On a quiet autumn afternoon, the doors of the Miller Russo Floral Therapy Center opened in Bronzeville. Sunlight poured through a glass greenhouse where children recovering from illness arranged wildflowers beside military veterans learning to manage trauma, while elderly neighbors taught young volunteers how to care for roses instead of dwelling on old regrets. The project existed because Adrian had offered unlimited funding. Grace accepted only after making one condition perfectly clear. "The foundation answers to the community," she told him, "not to your organization." He smiled. "I wouldn't change a single word." Evelyn became the center's first volunteer. Marcus quietly repaired broken benches before anyone noticed. Even Isabella appeared one morning, carrying boxes of gardening gloves, choosing service over the privilege she had once expected. Late that afternoon, as golden light filtered through climbing ivy, Adrian asked Grace to walk with him into the greenhouse, where everything had begun with flowers instead of fear. He held the familiar velvet box but kept it closed. "The first time," he said softly, "I offered this ring to the wrong woman by accident." Grace laughed gently, "And I gave it back. You returned more than a ring." His voice trembled with honesty. "You gave me the chance to become someone my brother would have recognized." Only then did he open the box. He did not reach for her hand. He waited. "Grace Miller," he said, "this time, the choice belongs entirely to you. Will you spend your life with me?" Tears brightened her smile. She placed her hand in his. "The first time," she whispered, "I returned your power." She looked into his eyes. "This time, I choose your heart." As Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, applause echoed through the greenhouse. Children laughed, flowers swayed in the afternoon breeze, and the man who had once ruled through fear discovered the greatest victory of his life had been earned through kindness, trust, and a woman who never allowed power to define love. Seeing Grace choose Adrian only after he gave her the freedom to choose him reminds us that the most meaningful promises are never taken. They are freely given. Real trust is built through actions, not words. Adrian didn't earn Grace's heart because he was powerful. He earned it because he learned to listen, to respect her choices, and stand beside her instead of standing over her. Today, think about someone in your own life who has quietly earned your trust through consistent actions, just as Grace did. If that person matters to you, don't wait for the perfect moment. Let them know, because genuine trust deserves to be recognized while it's still growing. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your first impression? Tell us your story in the comments. We'd love to read it. And if Grace and Adrian's journey stayed with you, don't miss our next story, where one unexpected moment changes two lives in a way no one could have imagined.